Ah, well, g'day to everybody. This video is really aimed at people, friends or otherwise, people over in Britain and the United States primarily, but anyone else around the world who watches this on YouTube and understand my English, or shall I say my Australian version of English, is very welcome to take notes, as it were, and pick up a couple of little ideas that I want to impart to you. Today is the 22nd of July 2017, by the way, and I'm sitting in my home in Bundamba near Ipswich and Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. The first thing I would suggest is that of course you would choose a very reputable and large and well known, in other words, travel agent in your area, primarily one who books rail. Argument's sake, if you're in America, you might be able to say, well, I'd like to buy a Eurail pass, or I'd like to buy a Britrail pass, or over here we have an Austrail Pass, which are not available for Australian citizens, but they are for people overseas. What is needed then is, you can hardly imagine, there's some people, particularly British, would hardly imagine the kind of railway system that we have in Australia, in a sense, for passenger trains is such that there are a number of once a week trains, like the Indian Pacific from Sydney to Perth, and the Adelaide to Darwin Ghan, which is, in my opinion, the best train trip in Australia, and the best train itself. And it's the longest north-south transcontinental railway in the world, just a little under 3,000 kilometres. And my tip would be, first of all, to obtain the pass, and secondly, to book 2 to 3 months in advance before leaving for Australia. And straight away you'd say, well, what's the best time to come? Well, anyone overseas would think, oh, I'll look it up, and oh, gee, Australia's climate is such that, it's opposite to Britain and the United States in the seasons. Oh, well, I'll go in summer. Well, actually, if anyone wanting to go on the Ghan, and also I'm going to mention another train, or a couple of trains in North Queensland, which is the Savannah-lander and the Gulf-lander, summer is most definitely not the time to come. And you wouldn't choose winter either necessarily, although in the northern part of the country right now they're enjoying 30-degree temperatures, which is Celsius or centigrade, whereas in southern parts of the country they're enjoying, if that's the right word for it, snow and hail and wind and rain, and maybe 10 or 12 degrees Celsius, whereas here in Queensland we're getting around, well, this part of Queensland, we're getting around 20 degrees today. So the best time, I would suggest, the very best month of the whole year to do northern trains, and perhaps get into the south as well before it gets cold, would be in May of any year. So if you're proposing to come next year, that's what you would do. Book 3 months in advance, and might I suggest that, for example, if you only have 2 to 3 weeks, which would be fairly typical, you would, for example, fly in to Darwin, and you would have typically 2 to 3 nights there, and do a bus tour and boat tour of the Kakadu National Park. It's one of the things you would do, for example, if you arrived on a Monday, you might do that on a Tuesday, because on the Wednesday the Ghan leaves at 10 o'clock from Darwin, and it gets to Adelaide on a Friday afternoon. the overland runs from Adelaide to Melbourne only twice a week, and make a note of some of this, of course, only on Mondays and Fridays, which is extraordinary. Even by Australian standards, it's absolutely abysmal, because you've got a city of a million people in Adelaide and a city of about 4 million in Melbourne. There's only a twice a week train service between the two. People would have perhaps heard of the XPT, which is more or less a basic look-alike or similar in some style to the British HST, the 125s, but that's where the similarity ends. They're quite slow by comparison, and are designed to do 160 kilometres an hour, which is around about 100 miles an hour in the old measurement. But to give you an idea, on the route between Sydney and Brisbane, they literally only travel at that speed for about 5% of the time. The rest of the time it's all through round curves and slow orders all the way, let's say. Sydney-Melbourne, they've got a little bit of spirited running, but not much. I would suggest breaks of journey on various routes. I wouldn't say get on a train and go to, certainly not Sydney-Brisbane. And incidentally, if a person was thinking about travelling the country by rail, in other words, they're going to go from Darwin, let's say, down through Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and up to Cairns, and then fly back to the United States or Britain from Cairns, that's an excellent choice of a elongated, sort of elongated, long north-south route coming in, and north-south, like south to north, going out along the coast or into North Queensland. So I'm mainly dealing here with New South Wales and Queensland, but just mentioning that trip to Darwin. And there is the Sydney to Perth Indian Pacific, and before people get excited about that and saying that's one of the best train trips around, it's not really. There are a couple of little highlights on it, but there's some rough running on the Broken Hill to Sydney section overnight, quite rough track and so forth. And the scenery is not over exciting. You see, I've been on quite a bit in the United States, and I've done a bit in Britain and a little bit in places like New Zealand and so on, and our scenery is not that good. The Ghan is interesting, and you do a couple of side trips at Catherine. You do the Catherine Gorge, and you do something in Alice Springs. Then you can, of course, you've got plenty to do in Adelaide for a couple of days if you wish. So you get there on the Friday, you might leave on the Monday. That gives you time to look around a little bit around Adelaide. And Melbourne is a paradise of tram systems for people who are enthusiasts like myself. And then there's the Puffin Billy Railway, which is essential to travel on, in my opinion. And it's 2-foot 6-gauge steam with mostly with Baldwins, with a Garrett there. Plus there's I think at least one Shay. And there's probably, I think, a Heisler running. So it's quite an extraordinary operation, and it's worthwhile travelling on. So look up Puffing Billy in Melbourne, get a timetable. Sydney's got plenty to offer. And for my British rail fan friends who are interested in this, and we only have, by the way, a couple of cliff railways in the whole of Australia, or funiculars, let's put it that way. But Katoomba is well worthwhile going to and riding the scenic railway, because it's the steepest railway in the world. To use your British terminology, it travels at 1 in 1, which is something like 45-degree angle. And it's not very, very long, but it's an old mining railway. Closed, it was, I think, opened in maybe the 1890s and closed down after they got the coal out of the region. And anyway, that's worthwhile looking at. Plus there's buses, trams, ferries, trains then around Sydney, and in Brisbane, or not so much in Brisbane, but the Gold Coast has a nice tram line, and that's nearly completed now to Helensvale, which means you'll be able to get on a train, go to Helensvale and get on a tram and go the full length of the line. Brisbane has a couple of points of interest, including, for those interested in buses, there's a couple of nice busways. and there's a couple of ferry trips and train trips around Brisbane. You must have an Austrail Pass to get advantage out of this, because the rail fares in Australia are extraordinary, and they're we have to describe them as unfair if you want to use a pun. For example, just Brisbane to Cairns is about a 24-hour trip, and if you paid full fare it's $521 one way with what they call a rail bed, which is somewhat like first class in some of the airlines, where you have the seats that lay flat. And they have entertainment, they have TV on movies, you can select the latest record albums, first run movies and so on. So for night time and whatever, that's fair enough. But they're very good for pensioners and for seniors card holders in here in Australia, but for overseas people you need the Austrail Pass, as I've been saying, and you need advanced reservations on any of these trains like what I've been talking about. So you go online and you look up New South Wales Train Link, you look up Queensland Rail, you look up Great Southern Railway, which has the 3 trains, which is the GAN, the Indian Pacific and the Overland, and make advanced bookings. That's the number one thing I would suggest, up to 3 months prior to coming here. There are numerous railway museums along the way as well, but now to mention one of the best rail travel experiences in the whole of Australia, please note down and Google Savannah-lander and the Golf-lander. Once a week, you can cheat and fly on a portion of this, by the way, if you have got the time. You can fly up on a Tuesday from Cairns up to Normanton, because every Wednesday the Golf-lander goes from Normanton down to Croydon. It's an isolated railway. It's one of the only isolated railways of its type anywhere nowadays, and it has a 50 or 60 year old or more rail motor on it and trailers. It's quite a delightful little trip. It's only semi-desert flat country, but they give commentary, and it's a very interesting and exciting trip, even that one. And you stay overnight. Now if you do a 6-day tour, and assuming you're going to do it by road, there's on Monday about 6:30 in the morning there's a bus goes Cairns right up to Corumba, right on the Gulf. You get there Monday night. It's about a 12-hour trip or so. Then you stay one night and you just take the bus the next morning to Normanton, where you stay overnight and get the Golf-lander on the Wednesday, a bus down to Forsyth on Thursday. Do take the tour to Cobalt Gorge, which is excellent. That's on the Thursday. Then Friday, the train called the Savannah-lander goes down to Mount Surprise, and then on Saturday it goes to Cairns, and you can have a night or two in Cairns and have a look at the Great Barrier Reef perhaps. And the trip south from Cairns to Brisbane is, in my opinion, better than going northbound, because you're fresh in the morning, and then by the time you get to night time and you're ready to have a sleep, you already get tired and you're ready to go to bed. And it arrives, it's 9 AM out of Cairns and 9:20 AM the next day into Brisbane. Now it only runs 5 days a week. It's very important to get that right. And there are a number of trips that are around the place that are, as I said to you, it might be once a week, might be twice a week, and so on. You've got to be very, very careful with that. So leave me a note on this YouTube if you want to. I can elaborate a little further on some details if you want to ask some questions. But in the meantime, I hope that some of my tips from my overseas friends would be useful and worthwhile following. And I could discuss many other things, but there's not the time right now to do so. So thank you for viewing.